Hey, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Uniform with the LT's daughter. Today's guest is Dina Campbell. She works for the NYPD, and we have been chatting for a long time in the DMs and in text and social media friends, which I absolutely love. So I am so thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm stoked. You have so much wisdom and so much experience and all kinds of stuff to offer. So I just can't wait to really dive in and share that with the audience. I do want to start off with, I know you and your husband were high school sweethearts, but
Yes.
now you both happen to be cops with the NYPD. So
Yeah.
I'd love for you to just kind of backtrack a bit and get
hmm
into how that came to be. Were you like going through high school, you both knew you wanted to be like cops, or
No,
did
not
yeah,
at all. Like
okay.
it's actually kind of crazy. Grew up in the same town, and it turns out that we ended up going to the same nursery school when we were like 3.
Mhm.
Went to different sessions, so like we didn't know that we didn't know each other
Right.
back then. But no, we both went to school for finance in 2008 when the stock market, like there was that whole recession and everybody in finance was getting laid off. We were kind of looking around like, now what? And his dad retired in 2004 from the NYPD. He retired as a sergeant. And he was just kind of like, you know what? I mean, if you have nothing else, at least it's a backup. And we were like, okay. I mean, it's job security, it's benefits, it's a good way to start out and learn some skills, and who knows what'll happen. So we took the test at the same time. It just so happened that we ended up in the same academy class. Like, we weren't in the same classroom, like in the same company, but we were in the same gym block. So, like, our investigators, we were going through the process and they were like, "Listen, 2011, July of 2011 looks pretty full. So plan on January of 2012." So we were like, "All right, awesome." We were already engaged, we were planning on getting married. So we were like, we'll get married in August of 2011, and then maybe towards the end of the year we'll like take a ski honeymoon, and then in January we'll start the academy. So we had this whole plan, and then July 4th we both got called and they were like, if you want the job, you'll be in Brooklyn on July 6th. And we were like, okay. So we started the academy July 6th of 2011, and then, like, literally almost exactly a month later, we got married, and people in the academy thought that, like, we had this whirlwind romance, and we just got married, like, a month into the academy.
That's so funny.
It was wild.
So why did that spot suddenly open up? Did people just like drop out and then
I have no idea. I just know that I got the
yeah,
phone call, and I was like, "Alright, I guess I'm
and you
taking
had to
it."
show up? Did you get to go
Yeah.
on the ski vacation?
No, we didn't.
Oh, that's
That's alright.
okay. Look at you
Yeah.
now. Okay, wait. So I love this because, and anyone listening already knows this because I talk about it sometimes, but your story is so aligned with my dad's
Mhm.
experience because, and you might know this because I know you follow my content, but like he went to school for mental health. And I don't just mean like a little bit. Yours is very, very similar to his because he went to school for mental health. He wanted to work in the mental health. He graduated college, got a job working in mental health, but that was in the 70s. And in the 70s, I guess like they were on this mental health rampage. They were at the time they had, like asylums for people with mental health problems, and they were shutting them all down and
Mhm.
they were displacing them. And the industry, like, just kind of crumbled because people who worked in those facilities didn't have jobs anymore, my dad being one of them. So he quite literally he got laid off, so same thing. And he was like, don't know what to do. Will this industry ever come back? Like fumbling a bit in his adult life. And fast forward, he tended bar for 2 years, and then he was finally like, I gotta figure something out. My uncle, his older brother, was a cop, so he was like, you know what? If he can do it, maybe I can do it. Great benefits, good
Yeah.
pay, job stability. It makes sense. So let's see what happens. And that's how he became a cop. And I think I just love that because I think people with that background and experience, and I want to ask you about this here in a second, have such a different mindset and mentality going into the job because it's it just is so much more, this is a job. This is what's, going to pay my bills. This is practical, less about like, I'm going to be the next Batman, or like, I really want to save X, Y, and Z and make this big difference. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I just think that those two different trajectories are so interesting. And I think the one that you have and my dad shares is rarer, or at least I've come across less people. So I'd love to hear, like, in your opinion, just like looking back throughout your career, do you think having that perspective sort of changed or affected the way you policed and went into the job and saw the job?
Yes, and even before we took like, once Pat and I knew that this was going to become, like, a real possibility, that we were gonna get into the academy, and it started to become real, I said to him, and we weren't even married at the time, but I'm like, "Listen, when we start a family, like, this is a good job, but to me, it's a job. So if it ever comes between us, our children, our future children, like our family, and one of us has to leave, I'm out. Like, it's no problem. I'll find something else to do. This is like our family, the family that we are going to build will be my priority. And it's nothing against, and I tell when I speak to new recruits, I tell this all the time to especially the legacy kids, because it was something that my father-in-law told my son and me, but like I'm not really a legacy kid. I'm like, I love that you were so inspired by the work that your parents did that now you want to continue that work. Just remember, this is now your career. You're not living their career and walking in their footsteps and doing everything the way they had to do it, because it's a different job now. So take the skills that you learn and carve your own path, like make it your career.
Yeah. I love that you call them legacy kids. I've never heard that before in my
Oh,
life.
really? I don't know if
Yes.
I made it up. It's just what I call them.
That's so funny. That's so cute. Amazing. And I think that's really important that you do share that with them right off the jump, because I think it's important for them to hear. Um, I want to ask you, since you do work with a lot of recruits, and even I think you work with even like seasoned police officers and stuff too,
Yes.
and peer support, and we'll get into peer support. But um, do you see more of one or the other? Like, do you see more of the practical, this is my job, I just needed something to pay the bills? Or do you see more of like, my dad did it, my mom did it, um, a police officer saved me when I was little, so I want to pay back, all of those sort of stories. Which one do you see more of?
I think it's a good mix. I think anybody who takes this job has some sort of like sense of service. You wouldn't be a
Yeah.
public servant if you didn't have some sort of servant heart, right? So, like, there is an element of that. There are a lot of people who now are taking the job because it is a stable job. But I do come across a really good mix of kids. A lot of them, the legacy kids specifically, maybe wouldn't have thought about taking this job, but realize that like there are other benefits to it than just like the career path that their parents took. Even though that's not the path that they want, they can still take this job and make it into something of their own.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. You have to have a servant heart. I actually think it's kind of interesting that you mentioned more people now are sort of seeing it as a make sense kind of a job, just, to pay the bills and stuff, because now policing is so much more difficult. I almost feel like you have to really want to be a police officer to become a police officer in today's society.
And that's what, and it kills me when I see, I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody, but everybody loves to throw shade on the younger generations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, "Oh, these guys, they don't wanna work, they don't wanna do this." Well, I mean, they're here taking the job. Maybe they're in the academy now, and down the road, they decide it's not right for them, and that's okay, but they're here right now, so at least let's give them a chance, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I often wonder if policing is changing a little bit. I interviewed Jared Hardy a couple weeks ago. His episode has not aired yet, but it will soon. And he works with recruits also. He has a training organization. And he was mentioning, he retired after 20 years on purpose. He was like, I'm only doing 20 years. And he has an interesting sort of perspective of like, if you go beyond 20 years, are you actually doing, you know, good by yourself, by your community? Like, is this actually a job that we should be having people do 30, 40 plus odd years? Or should there be some sort of, you know, regimen or, some sort of like, we'll cut it off at this time so that you can go on and have another job and not, start to fall into some of the things, some of the bad habits or mentalities that cops can fall into after that 20-year mark. And I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but I think that that's, an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't want to speak for the cops who have been on longer than 20, but once you get to that retirement age, it's like, well, who am I staying on for?
Hmm.
I worked this time to be able to ideally, maybe if you have a family at home, to be able to provide a life for my family. And I did that. And now I'm young enough that I can either still have another career or enjoy my retirement, what time I have left with my family. It seems like a lot of people who made the job their whole life have a really difficult time retiring because this has been their complete identity for so long that if it gets taken away, they don't know who they are.
Exactly. And that's something we see a lot with police officers. And I think most first responders, right? But we're talking about police officers, you see that a lot is that they will, put off retiring or, when they do retire, they have a really hard time kind of figuring out what comes next. And it's a real problem. And when I on this episode, and I talk about this sometimes, is like if a police officer has been on the job for, I think it's like over 25, maybe it's even 30 years, the average is that they die within 5 or 7 years of retirement.
Yes.
That's horrific.
Mhm.
And it's like,
It's
what's behind that? I mean, because you're not retiring at 80 or even 70. Like you're retiring fairly young typically. So what's going on, right?
I know, it's and that's what I tell people, like, it's horrifying, as you said, to work your whole life and then only live 5 to 7 years past retirement. It's like there's a carrot dangling in front of your face, like, there's always gonna be whether it's a number, you wanna make a certain number of money a month in retirement, there's always gonna be a way, a reason for you to stay on to chase that number, and then you hit that number, and then it's like, "But maybe I can make a little bit more." And then before you know it, you're doing 30, 35 years or you're aging out. And then you're only living 5 to 7 years. You're not living long enough to even benefit from that number that you worked so hard to reach.
Yeah, exactly. And it's heartbreaking. And I think that we just need to talk about it more because I know a lot of people don't even know that statistic, that is a statistic, or that the life expectancy of a cop is 66 in a world where life expectancy is 77. Like,
Mm.
there's just so many things that aren't being talked about enough. I'm glad to see people like you and others who are starting to speak up or like have these conversations a little bit more. I do want to backtrack a little bit to when you had told your husband that if things get crazy, if someone needs to take a step back, it's going to be me. First of all, that's amazing. I love that you kind of one had that self-awareness and that um attitude of just knowing what you wanted, what you were prioritizing. This is something that I talk about too. It's like this idea of knowing what you want out of life. Like a career is great, but if you're going to choose to have a family, then maybe having a happy, healthy family is what you want to have out of life. So I think that that's fantastic that you sort of had that knowledge and that wherewithal to step up and make that decision. Did you ever come close to actually, because I know you're still a cop, so that hasn't happened. Did you ever almost or think about it or start to take the
Yes.
steps? Yeah.
Yes. Like, I don't even know how many times, like, this close. And I've
Mm.
had, I mean, I've had 3 children while being on the job, so it's like after every pregnancy, it was like, "All right, we reevaluate, is this still working?" Or like something happens and, you get transferred somewhere and you're working these crazy hours and it's like, "Is this still working?" "Can we is this worth it for our family?" Because the family was always the priority.
Yep.
Everything else revolves around it.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that perspective. It's like kind of like what I just said. Is this still serving us? Is this still
Mhm.
working for the family? Because I got into this from a family to pay the bills, to have the
Yeah.
insurance, and if things get wonky, then it's not worth it anymore. And I love that you guys actually did that. You kind of reevaluated after every baby, like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's sort of take inventory, see where things are going, and then make an intentional, I talk about intentionality a lot, an intentional decision to continue forward or decide what the next steps are. I, you having three babies as a police officer blows my mind. I mean, granted, I don't have any babies, but like, I just cannot imagine. So again, kudos and props, all of them to you. But I would also just love to know, like, very, almost like tactically, how did you handle that? I mean, from a logistics perspective, from a mindset perspective. I mean, like logistics are a nightmare when you get babies. Having two working parents can be a nightmare when you have babies. Um, going into a job that is physically taxing and also mentally taxing when you've just had a baby. Like I just cannot even wrap my mind around it. So if you could just share, I'm fascinated, to be quite honest.
It was well, let's see. After my first 2, I did go back to patrol. After the 3rd pregnancy, I went back, and there was an inside spot available, so I took that for the steady schedule. But I don't know, while I was at work, it was like I was at work,
Mhm.
and of course, I'm always worrying about like, is the baby okay in the back of my mind, but I really tried to just focus on being present and handling the job. But then when I'm back at the house at the end of the day and I'm like getting changed and ready to go home, people like joke and my nickname used to be like who Dina because as soon as the shift was over, I was out. I was like racing
Yes.
home to my babies, you know what I mean? Like don't if you need me, call me. I'm driving, but like I'm going home to my kids.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. Why do you think you were able to do that? Do you think that that was just like innate within you? Because this is interesting too. It's like not everybody can do that. And I know like the term compartmentalized sometimes gets a bad rep, but I do think that I don't think there's a better word for it. And I do think that it is very beneficial in this career. So how, because my dad was also very good at it. So I'm constantly like trying to peel back the layers, trying to figure out like what is the secret sauce that some of these people do so well that is missing in so many others.
Oh, that's a good question. I honestly don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it was because I knew that like my oldest was home with my mom for a while, and
Hmm.
then we found this amazing woman through a coworker who I don't even want to call her a babysitter because she's more like family at this point. But she's a stay-at-home mom, and she was, like, so great with my kids, and, like, I never had to worry about them or, like, on days where I was working and my husband was off, as long as I knew the kids were taken care of, it didn't matter what I was doing, how long I was staying, like, I wasn't gonna be happy about it, but just knowing that the kids were safe and taken care of took a huge stress off my shoulders, and I was a maybe that's why I was able to compartmentalize and just focus on the job.
Hmm. But then how did you not bring the job home? Was it just because you were so happy to be home with your babies, maybe?
Well, I mean, yes, and my commute, I live like over an
Yeah.
hour outside the city. So I had all of that time. And people, I get jokes a lot that I live in Canada because I live, like 60 plus miles
But it's so
outside the
nice.
city. That was the only
I've
time that
seen
I
the
would have
green.
to myself all day. Like, because I'm at work, you're serving the public, you're serving people in your department. And then I'm home and I'm serving my family, which is I love that.
Mm.
And it's also important to take time for me. So, like, my commute, whether it was in the morning, like, mentally preparing for my day, transitioning from, like, mom to cop, or in the afternoon, blowing off steam, making phone calls, like, sometimes I would just turn the music up really loud and, like, sing at the top of my lungs just to get all the stress out, whatever I had to do so that I could leave it at work, and then the closer I got to home, it was like, "All right, now I'm in mom mode. Now I'm getting excited to see the babies," you know?
Yeah, it's so interesting you bring that up too, because so I'm constantly, and I'm doing it a lot right now just because your story is so similar to my dad's. Um, I'm like constantly trying to reverse engineer some of the things that he did or some of the things that he had at play, that I think sort of set him apart and set him up for success in balancing the two worlds. And because a lot of people say it's not possible, and I'm like,
Mhm.
it's possible. Maybe we'll talk about that. Um, but that's something that he had too. It was like a built-in decompression time because he didn't live as far as you do, but he lived, I think he had like a good 40-minute commute. So,
That's yeah, that's still a good
that
sign.
drive home I'm telling you, in the 80s and 90s, he did not know that he was decompressing or like any of the buzzwords that we use now, but I think it was like a built-in decompression time that really let him like transition driving along and doing what he wants to do in the car before he comes home. I think actually did make a difference whether he realized it or not. So it's interesting to hear you kind of theorize something similar.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what worked for me. That's the only thing that I can think of, but it really does help.
Yeah. So I'm curious about like the schedule, especially when the kids were young. I mean, you just mentioned your mom and the family babysitter, but how, especially because not only are you both cops, you both have an hour plus commute to go be cops.
Yeah.
And as we all know, cop schedules can change and with your first two, you went back to patrol, so I'm sure your schedule is different from time to time. So like how? How did you do it?
There were a lot of days where I was, like, frantically making phone calls, trying to scramble, like, one of my sisters, I would get them, like, after they were done working, they would come and grab the kids, or, like, my dad and my stepmom, or my mom and my stepdad, like, somebody was always around that I would b you know, I'd be like, "Listen, I just need you to take them for a couple hours until I can get there." And then, like, those days, my decompression time in the car, you can forget about that. I was just
Yeah.
like, running home to them as soon as I could get there, and I felt so bad for how I saw it as, like, inconveniencing somebody by making them rearrange their day, but, like, I grew up in a big Italian, like, Catholic family, so we always had people coming in and out, like, your life just kind of revolves around your family, so they were happy to help out, and I was always happy to help out them.
Which is why I talk about the importance of having non-law enforcement loved ones in your life
Me
because they
too.
can be, I mean, aside from the fact that like they quite literally keep you rooted in reality, in my opinion, they can also be really useful useful because they've got a 9 to 5 or they're staying at
Exactly.
home. So like they can be there for you. So another perk to having non-law enforcement loved ones in your life.
Yes.
What was your sort of, because I want to talk about your peer support here in a minute, because that's what you do now.
Mm.
But you personally, did you ever like have a moment where you thought, I maybe want to explore this mental health, getting some additional support, anything like that for you personally?
Yes, I actually talk about it all the time when I'm teaching because some of the tools that my therapist gave me or that helped me, I pass on. I'm very open about the fact that I was active duty in therapy because I don't want anybody to feel like they have to they can't do it, right? That
Mm.
because there's still very much a stigma. So my oldest daughter was 6 at the time, and we almost lost her in a bus accident.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was October of 2020 during COVID. They were on their way to school, and I it was the create like I got this screenshot, and I'm getting chills when I talk about it, from my babysitter. There's like a, a emergency firewire feed on social media. And she was like, hey, this is her bus route. Do you want me to go see if everything is okay? And as soon as I opened it, I got a phone call from the school, and it was the superintendent. And he goes, I just want you to know there was a bus accident. It was your daughter's bus. There were like a few, other students on the bus, minor bumps and bruises. Your daughter is still pinned in the bus. She was sitting behind the bus driver. The bus was hit head on. I don't know her condition right now. Meet me at this hospital. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Are you
So
in New York City when you get that call?
of course,
Oh
me and
my
my husband
God.
we were both at work that day. It was like
A
all like my worst
nightmare.
nightmare was coming true, because like this was my biggest fear that something was going to
Yeah.
happen and I was going to be at work. But the amount of support. So we got up there, we got to the hospital, but in the aftermath of that, like, immediately I kinda went into cop mode. I started compartmentalizing, like, she wasn't really my kid on the way up there until I saw her in the hospital bed, like, it was. And then once that happened, then I was like, "All right." It was like crisis mode, and I didn't really deal with it for a really long time.
Mm.
I would say probably about a year. Once it started coming up to a year, I started feeling very anxious. Like, I started isolating myself from my husband and my kids because I had a very short fuse. I had no patience. I felt like I was snapping at everybody. I'm like, this isn't me. Like, something's not right. It felt like I was I don't know if you've ever seen those movies where somebody's standing still and then there's like time lapse and everybody's moving really
Mhm.
quickly around
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah.
That's how I felt. I felt
Oh my
like I was
gosh.
standing still and the world was moving around me and I was stuck. And
Ooh.
that's when I was like, all right, it's time for me to go to therapy. I was in therapy as like a teenager. So I was like, I'm familiar with the concept of it. So I found this therapist actually through my sister, and when I was on my intake call, that was like I was breaking, I was crying, I was like a mess. I'm like, like, obviously I'm not okay. I'm not a danger to myself or anybody else. I'm
Mhm.
just really overwhelmed. But my first question was, do I have to tell my job about this? And she was like, Would you tell your job you were going to the dentist?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "You don't have to tell anybody anything." And I was like, "Oh," and so there was an element of relief. Even after being a peer supporter, I was still nervous to go
Mhm.
into therapy because I didn't know what that meant for me or my job, but it was the best thing I ever could have done.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we hear that a lot. So I'm actually kind of curious about your experience because I think it might be different state to state. And I think we've talked about this. I think it might be different state to state. Or I wonder if it's different because you didn't go through EAP, or did you?
No, I didn't. I went through my
So
private insurance.
I wonder if that maybe plays a role because that is something that people fear. And I've even heard of like, you know, therapists breaching confidentiality with cops specifically, and there's a lot of like very legitimate horror stories that I've heard. And aside from the innate fear that I think comes with it, there is also like actual horror stories out there that kind of lend credit to those like made up fears, I guess, that people have.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's wonderful that you had a different experience, and it never like, did it ever come up with your job? Did it ever like, did the two things ever cross paths where you did get nervous that it was going to get out or that you were actually going to be talked to or anything?
I was nervous to tell my immediate supervisor because I was like, "Hey, can I start a little bit earlier on whatever day and leak so I can get out a little bit earlier because I'm going to therapy in the afternoon?" And she was like, "Yeah, that's amazing. Of course. Like, completely support you."
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
There
awesome.
and then so there was a summer where I was sent out to a beach detail, and they gave me Tuesday, Wednesdays off, and it just so happened that, like, Wednesday was the day I had my therapy appointments, and they were like, "We'll give you weekends off if you want," and I'm like, I'd rather take the Tuesday, Wednesday." So, like, because I didn't really know those bosses, I didn't mention that I was in therapy, but I was
Mm.
able to keep my Wednesdays off, so it wasn't an issue.
Yeah. And so do you know, like, are there places maybe where if you're in therapy, you do have to tell your your job? Like, is that a thing? Do you know?
I mean, as an EAP, if you're like a
Yeah.
peer supporter, if somebody calls and says, "Hey, I need a resource for therapy," I just give them the resource or connect them to the resource, and that's it. You know, I don't there's no notification on my end. There's no
Mhm.
notification on the member's end. I mean, the only time I could see they're having to that the department having to get involved is if the member is in such a crisis that, like,
Mhm.
for safety reasons, maybe their
Right.
firearm needs to be removed.
Right.
But if it's, like, aside from a crisis situation, and even then, it's not the end of the world, that's always the worst case scenario in people's
Mhm.
minds, and 9 times out of 10, somebody who that happens to, they go through they get the help that they need, and then they're back to work. So,
Yeah.
even in that case, it's not the end of the world. But in most cases, if you just go and seek therapy resources, no, you don't have to say anything, at least for my department.
Yeah. And that's why I say maybe it's just different state to state or department to department because that makes sense to me. Because in my mind, it's like, well, I'm not going to tell my job that I have, a dermatologist appointment. Like, why would I tell them that I have a therapy appointment? But
Right.
again, I've heard from other people that they have to report it. So I don't know, maybe it's different in places, but I do want you to kind of talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned because as we kind of talked about, the fear is I'm going to lose my gun and badge if I go get the help that I likely need. Because if you think you need it, then you probably do. And that is detrimental. That's causing a problem. That is such a big fear for people. And with you being in peer support, I'm curious. I hope you have some insight into what that could mean. You touched on it a little bit just now, where it's like if you do have to have your gun taken away, then what happens?
So if there's a few different scenarios that might happen. Let's say it's the worst case scenario, meaning that the member does not want to voluntarily get help, but now they're in such a compromised mental state, they're in a crisis, and they need help because now they're suicidal and they're a danger to themselves, right? That's the worst case scenario. So if they don't want to get help, they still go to the hospital, they still get the help that they need, and then when they come back to work, they're in a restricted duty status, so they still usually have their shield, but they don't have a firearm, and they can either go back to their command, if they some people feel very supported by their command, the camaraderie is really good. Other people, for whatever reason, maybe the command was a stressor, so they go somewhere else and they're on, like, a desk duty assignment. And then, once after a certain amount of time, they get cleared by department physicians to come back to work, and then they get restored and they go back full duty.
Oh, okay. It's not too bad. You
No,
just
it's
got to go
really
through the
it's not as
process.
scary as exactly, it's not as scary as people think, and, whenever I talk about confidentiality in my role now, I always tell people, "We are confidential aside from suicide or homicide, but that doesn't mean we're looking to, like, get anybody. We're
Right.
not doctors, we just want people to get the help that they need before it gets to the point that they're in an active crisis."
Right. Does the NYPD have, you have a very extensive peer support program, if I'm not mistaken. Do you guys have like a therapist on staff or anything? I interviewed, I'm not sure if you listened to the episode, but I interviewed Dr. Medina Baumgart a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Such a good interview. She's
Yes.
fantastic. She's
She's
amazing. But
great, yes.
she's actually a therapist for a police department, which I think is really cool and interesting. I've never heard of that before. Does NYPD have anything like that?
We do. We have a team of clinicians who they do what's called like critical incident debriefings. So it's usually one of us, one of the peers, and a clinician. And anytime a cop goes to a critical incident, they get called down. Appearance is mandatory just to take the stigma out of it. Because if you and I were at roll
Right.
call, we went to a critical incident and you were like, I don't really need to talk about it, but I'm like, "No, that really bothered me." As soon as I leave the room, everybody's gonna be talking about the fact that I voluntarily went to go see a clinician, and I'm not strong enough to handle the job, and I'm gonna get my guns removed, right? All of these things, because sometimes we're our own worst enemy.
Mhm.
So, appearance is mandatory, participation is completely voluntary, but the idea is to normalize conversations around mental health, normalize cops speaking to clinicians in a non-evaluative setting, because a lot of times the only experience we have with clinicians is that initial evaluation, the psych evaluation for whether or not we're fit to take the job. Or I mean, and at our medical division, there is a great team and they have a job to do there too, and they do a great job with the officers and civilians. But there's another team for our health and wellness, and the only thing that's different is the confidentiality. So the health and wellness clinicians, they do the critical incident debriefings and they do support sessions. So if a member voluntarily wanted to come down and schedule a support session with a clinician, that would be confidential. The clinician would not have to tell the department anything that was discussed. And it's a way for uniform and civilian members to kind of get exposed to, it's not actual therapy, but it's, like therapeutic to be supported and have that positive interaction with a clinician.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you guys are doing that. The NYPD is doing a lot of really cool stuff, it seems like, which I want to talk about. So before we get into that, why you're in peer support now? Why did you decide to go that route?
I always kind of had the personality where I would like talk to people and just take an interest even before I was a cop. That's just my nature.
Mhm.
After graduating the academy, a few weeks after I graduated, one of the guys who was in my academy class in my company died by suicide.
Mm.
And so going to that funeral and just seeing his family and going through it myself, the grief, like I didn't really understand. I didn't talk to him after we graduated because we went to different boroughs. He was in the Bronx and I was in Manhattan North. But all the unanswered questions and working through that on the job, like being so new on the job, and it just kind of put me on a path, I think. And in 2019, we had unfortunately a contagion of like 10 active duty members that died by suicide. I was really frustrated and I was like, well, instead of waiting around for like somebody to do something, I was like, what can I do? And then I had a friend who was an EAP and he told me that they were starting a peer support program. And that's when I signed up.
Okay, so that was I was going to ask, when did this peer support program start to really take shape? Was it in 2019?
Yeah, it was like September or October of 2019 was the first class.
Oh, good, just in time for the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
So you actually jumped in right at the beginning. So did
Mhm.
you have like sort of a hand in crafting what it is now?
No, it was crafted by
Okay.
these 2 guys who are retired now, but they did a
Oh,
fantastic job, yeah.
but
They did
that's
a
really
one.
cool.
Yeah, mhm.
Wow. Do they still participate?
Not not with the department. It's like sometimes they'll come in as guest speakers.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Do you know like what drove them to do that? Was it something similar? They were just sick and tired of all of these suicides and wanted to change it?
Yes.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what does it kind of look like? I don't want you to, give away all of the
No, it's
secrets, the
okay.
secret sauce, but I do think that, NYPD being the biggest department in the country, you guys have sort of figured it out in a big way. Especially as the East Coast is concerned. I think the West Coast is a little bit more progressive. So over here, I just love to see everything that the NYPD is doing for their police and with the peer support program. So, do you have like mandatory meetings for cops? Is everything voluntary? Like what kind of does it mean to have a peer support program, especially for such a big department?
So, the peer support program is separate from like our employee assistance unit. The
Okay.
employee assistance unit, we were up to 22 members. I think now we're down to like 14, 12 or 14. But We're full-time, we're 24/7, we're supporting all the members of the department, uniformed civilian and family members, and so we do that that's like our full-time job. And we have a network of over 450 peers who volunteered to be in the peer support program, who are still in their commands. And the idea behind that is that they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in their command better than we do because we're now only a team of like 14, 12, whatever. And you know, we there's no possible way that we can keep track of everything that goes on in every borough all the time. So the peers are in their commands, they're going to roll calls, like people see them out on patrol or whatever assignment that they have. And they just feel the idea is to feel comfortable talking to somebody that you see all the time and just to normalize having conversations about mental health.
And what kind of, because you go through trainings to be a peer support
Yes.
person, right? What does that kind of look like? Because obviously it doesn't make you a clinician, but it does give you tools, right, to be able
Mhm.
to ask the right questions or say the things that aren't going to set someone off, right? Is
Yes.
that the idea?
Mhm. So, I mean, I'm
Okay.
kind of biased because I teach it, but I think it's a
Oh,
great training.
there you go. I love that.
Yeah. So peers get 4 days of training. 1 day they get is mental health first aid, which is like a certified, I think it's like worldwide program about basic mental health skills, like recognizing certain signs and symptoms, normalizing the conversation, connecting somebody to resources if they need it. And that tool is basically the idea of like we know CPR and like physical
Mhm.
first aid, and now this is just an added tool for like our mental health. So they get 1 day of mental health first aid. They get certified in being a mental health first aider, which they can take with them outside the job. And then they get 3 more days of we go through active listening skills, we go through like confidentiality, they get introduced to resources on the job and outside the job because at the end of the day, we really do not care where the member of service goes to get help, so long as they get help that they need. They don't have to use department resources. I'm always referring people outside the job. It's really up to the member and what makes them more comfortable.
Cool. Amazing. And how do you like get people to decide I want to be a peer support person? Like, is it just kind of out of the goodness of their heart? Like, how does that work?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, they already have the personality that they wanna
Yeah.
help people or they've been through something and they wanna share it with people. Because it's voluntary, like, they don't get any overtime for this. They're not on call 24/7 like we are, like, we don't expect them to do that. But while they're working, they do wanna put themselves out there and be that resource for other cops
Yeah,
or
I love that.
civilians.
I love that. I think that's just very nice to hear that they are out there, that they are actively raising their hand and being the ones to step up. But you
Mhm.
just mentioned that you are on call
Yes,
24/7.
yes.
How does that work? Especially when you live so far.
So after the office closes, there's a rotation. Everyone in the office, like,
Okay.
you pick a week and 1 week you're on call. After the office closes, any calls that come into the office get routed to our phones and we just take the call.
Okay. So you're not on call. You are not on call 24/7,
No, no,
365. It's
my
like,
unit, employee assistance unit is on call 24/7, 365.
okay. Oof,
I'm on
but
call like
still,
once
that's a
a month.
lot. That's still a lot, especially
Yeah,
with 3 kids, which I
yeah,
wanna I wanna talk a little bit about the kids and the family because that's what I do.
yeah.
First of all, have any of your kids, I know they're still pretty young, but have any of them expressed any interest in being a cop like mom and dad?
No, but
Nothing.
that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, no legacy kids in my family
Yeah,
either,
yeah, that's
so
okay. No, not yet.
that's so funny because I feel like so many times they're like, "Oh, my kid already knows he wants to be a cop," or "My kids are always dressing up like a cop," or, so it's interesting that they've kind of chosen a different path or are going to choose a different path.
I don't, maybe it's because we don't talk about, like, it's not something that comes up all the
Mhm.
time. They're not inundated by it. So, like, dinner table conversation is more about, like, us listening to how their day was. Because what are we, like, they don't really wanna hear war stories, and what are we gonna tell them? So, it's just not something that comes up all the time.
Which is something I also wanted to bring up, like, if I met you on the street, never in a million years would I think that you were of a law enforcement family. Like, I just well, actually, when I first came across your page, I had no idea that you were a cop. Gradually, I think I put together that maybe you were married to a cop, but I just like it didn't land with me. And I just think that that is really awesome, especially with the work that I do and the work that you do and the things that we talk about, because that's really important to be able to understand that you're a person beyond the job and outside of the job. It's really important to kind of have that balance and that mindset, in my opinion. So I love
Yes.
that. I think that that's super refreshing about you. And I guess even to that point, how do you think you manage that? Like, because it can be a very encompassing job.
It can be. I think, and that's honestly, like, my favorite, that's the highest compliment that I can get from somebody is, like, "I would never know that you were a cop," because then it's, like, good that I'm still grounded, I'm still anchored in the
Yeah.
real world, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
whenever I have such a large extended family, and whenever we get together, they're always like, I can't, like, really? I can't believe you're a cop." And I'm like, "I know, it's crazy." Because it was just never something that I ever thought that I would do. And I'm still, like, I have so many people, thankfully, in my life who are not cops that I'm connected to all the time, that it's just not, like, when I'm not at work, it's really not something that I think about much.
Yeah. And uh, I think this is an interesting topic because some people are just like, that's not realistic, or you can't be a good cop, or, you are a paper pusher. Like, there's just a lot of, I think, stigma around
Mhm.
this concept of being able to do both. And it's a problem, in my opinion, where it's like we can't just write everyone off because they know how to go home and turn it off. That's a good thing. That's not a problem. So why are we making that a problem?
And that's part of the culture shift, that we're trying to change with peer support and with employee assistance. People who, yeah, I mean, yeah, is it easy? And I tell this to cops, like, when I go to commands, I'm like, "Yes, it's easy for me to stand up here and tell you guys to take care of yourselves because I'm not the one out there right now." Sometimes I am, most of the time I'm not. So, it I would, like, you can't fight City Hall, but you can outlive it, right? Because you're gonna outlive an administration, you're gonna outlive, whatever is going on, and you have to take this into your private life, and it's up to us to take care of ourselves. Whatever that looks like for an individual, I think is great. I think if you're a parent and you can find a job, like, uh on in the department that gives you a steady schedule so that you can be home to your family if that's your priority, I think that's wonderful. I think if your spouse stays home with the kids and you need to crush it in overtime to put food on the table for your family and you can find a unit that does that, I think that's amazing. I don't think there's any reason to be throwing shade at people for finding what works for them.
Yes, mic drop. Because yeah, that's exactly it. I want to get back to the family, but is this something that you in your role that you see people have that sort of chip on their shoulder where it's like, I can't do both, or I'm better off at the job, or I have to take on all this overtime, or to be a good cop, I have to be doing it all the time. Like, do you see people come through with that mindset, and how do you sort of get through to them?
Sometimes, yeah, I do see people that come through with that mindset and then I just say, "Why? Why do you think that
Mhm.
way?" 'Cause some people are, so they have this idea in their head, and they never stop to ask why they believe that, and maybe it's just because when they were a rookie, somebody told them that, and it stayed with them because they thought that that was the way it had to be, and maybe it's not.
Mm. Yeah. And I think that's an important point to make for anyone. It's like, get curious. learn
Mhm.
more about the reasons and ask the questions, and then maybe you can come up with a solution together or open their mind. Because sometimes it's not that, they're angry or they have any reason to think that other than they were told that 20 years ago and they just
Right.
never thought otherwise. And
Mhm.
maybe it's just inaccurate. Um, but okay, so back to the family and the kids and the fact that you're both police officers that live an hour outside of the city that you police. I cannot understand how you guys do it all. And I am kind of curious, we hear a lot about the changing schedules, the holidays, the games, the dance recitals, all of these things that can be missed. And I know you mentioned you have a really great support system when in a pinch. But in general, like when you and your husband are on opposite schedules, or I guess maybe opposite schedules is kind of nice, but when you and your husband don't have full control over your schedule or when you're getting called in or which holidays one of you or both of you may be called into work. How do you guys navigate that? Or how have you navigated that?
As long as the kids like, as long as somebody is there for them,
Hmm.
you know, like, because there's nothing worse than, like, playing in a game and seeing nobody. Even if
Yeah.
I make it for the last 5 minutes, I'm showing up. As long as like, one of us is showing up if we can help it. If we can't help it, like, on a holiday, if we have to work, then we just celebrate around our work schedules, and we don't make it a thing.
Yeah. And you don't make it a thing. I love that. That's what it is. And have you ever like are your kids chilling? Like they still have happy Christmases or holidays and they still play in their games and do the things, right?
Of course, because once the presents are open Christmas morning, like, we could both be gone, and they probably wouldn't even know because 'cause they're playing with their present you know what I mean? Not that that happens, but you know what I'm saying, like,
No, yeah.
a as long as we're there for a moment, even if we can't be there
Hmm.
all day, it's like those little moments is really what matters more than it's the quality over the quantity.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
if even if I was in like, for the most part, I have a steady schedule. If I'm home on the weekends and we're all in separate rooms and we're plugged into devices, yeah, we're all in the same house, but, like, nobody's spending time together. But if
Hmm.
we if there's a week where things are really chaotic and all we have is, like, family dinner one night, that's gonna be the most present, intentional family dinner that we could ever have that week.
Yeah. And those are the things that are going to stand out to them in 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years, because those are the things that they're going to remember. And I think that's just so important to hear as someone listening, because we get caught up in the glitz and the glamour and the things and the vacations and all of these different ideas in our mind, but when it comes down to it, it's just a moment, a special moment, a shared moment, a quality time moment. And to your point, sometimes if my dad couldn't get off on Christmas, he would make sure that he got a later like call in time or whatever time that he had to show up because
Mhm.
he he wanted to be there in the morning because that's what I remember. I don't remember Christmas night. I guarantee you I don't remember a single Christmas evening. I don't.
Right.
But I remember every Christmas morning. I remember him taking our picture on the steps every day, every Christmas morning. And so I think like whether that's Christmas morning or Christmas Eve or the day after Christmas or even like we got into the habit of making New Year's special too because sometimes New Year's would be the day that we would like get together and have family time. So whatever it is that works for you, I think the key is to remember just to kind of repeat what you said, quality over quantity, like being present in those moments, small moments, emphasize small.
Mhm.
Um, and I forget what the other thing I was going to bring up was because I loved that you had said it. Um, Not making a big deal out of it. I love that you said that. I think that's so important because sometimes as the adult, I think we understand like, oh, this sucks. But the kid doesn't understand that. The kid
Exactly.
understands that you're upset that something sucks,
Yes.
but if you're at the game for 5 minutes, they're like, woohoo, my parents at the game for
Exactly.
5 minutes. That's all
There
I
was
care about.
there was one video I have, like, my daughter, it was, like, her first chorus concert, and my husband was running late, and I have a video of her singing, and the moment that, like, he walks in and she sees him, her face just lit
Oh,
up, and it
oh my
didn't
God.
matter that, like, he wasn't there for the beginning, like, the fact that he made it, and just thinking about it now makes me wanna cry because, like,
Makes me want to cry.
he was just so, like, it was, and that's what it's about, you know what I mean? It
Mhm.
didn't matter that he wasn't there for the whole thing. He found a way to be there, he showed up, and that's what she's gonna remember.
Exactly. In 20 years, she's not going to remember if he missed the first 90% of the
Yep,
thing. She's
yep,
going to remember that he, gave her the flowers at the end or gave her a
yep,
hug at the end. Like
yep.
she's just going to remember that little bit. So I think I love that. You have a big Italian family, you
Yes.
mentioned. I have a small Italian family. I'm 50% Italian, 50% Irish.
Well, that's my
Um,
kids.
really?
My husband's Irish, yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. My dad is Irish. My mom is Italian.
It's funny.
Um, and one thing, again, just going back to this like community piece, and I will say if you're Italian, I feel like maybe you have a little bit of a leg up because a lot of times they are just kind of a built-in community. But something that I remember from when I was little, and I actually just confirmed by going through old photo albums recently. When we were little and in our activities and stuff, if my dad couldn't make it, our godmother would come, who happens to be one of my mom's sisters. So like my one aunt would go to my sister's things, my other aunt would go to, my things. And I think that that's another example of like, if both people can't be there, then maybe have like a stand-in. Because again, the kid's just going to be happy that someone is there for them. And
Exactly.
I just want to like drive home this point that it, we complicate it again because I think we have the understanding and the knowledge and we know that it can suck to not have both parents at a thing or whatever. Um, but if that's what we think about and that's what we're fretting about, that's what's going to kind of trickle down. So I think
Exactly.
our attitude makes a big difference also.
And even, like, the day of Megan's accident, my oldest, my husband's uncle, he's all very big Irish family, extended family, they're all very close-knit. So his uncle knew that we were both at work and just dropped everything and drove straight up to the hospital, and we ended up getting there at the same time, but, like, just knowing that somebody was there, you know, it was such a comfort.
Yeah, that's amazing. So again, make sure you have friends outside of law enforcement.
Yes,
Law enforcement friends have their place, but the community of people who really are grounded and surrounded by what I call the real world is just so important. Actually, let's talk about that for a second
yeah,
because that is something that you have a lot of is that regular people community, like I don't know, non-law enforcement community. Is that something that you intentionally decided or you set out to sort of prioritize or how did that come to be?
I think that's a good question. I think it's a couple of things. The fact that my priority has always been my family outside the job has given me that perspective. And also the fact that I live so far outside the city and all like the social gatherings that happen after work are usually in the city. And I don't want to have to drive home even later than I do. I
Yeah.
think that plays a big factor because
Mhm.
it's not that I don't love the people that I work with. And I do, like, I do sometimes spend time with them if there's, like, a Christmas thing or whatever, like, once in a
Mhm.
while, but I think that has a big part to do with it too, like, my life is up is at home. My life isn't
Yeah.
at work.
Yeah, which is really important. And I think to your point, like not always participating in some of those after work extracurricular activities can really help with with that balance concept. And you know, that's not to say that you're not going to participate, but maybe like be mindful and pick and choose
Exactly.
which ones you're going to actually participate. Like a big Christmas event or a retirement party or some sort of celebration, like have at it. But like if we're just going to go to the dive bar on the corner, like
Yeah.
maybe I'll just head home.
Yeah, no, thank you. If
Yeah.
it's if it's like take your kids to work day, awesome, because now I can bring them in and they can like kind of see what's going on and like there's they get excited to see like all the different things. Anything that involves the family, I'm all about it. Or like, if my husband, I'll bring him to the Christmas party or he'll bring me to his Christmas party, even if we don't bring the kids, like at least we're both there. So there's like an element of family, but anything other than that, no, I stay away from it. Not and I'm not it can be a great outlet. I'm not putting that down. That's just not my priority.
Right. Yeah. And that's fair. And I think that that's another like important word that I use a lot too is priorities, understanding what your priorities are and not A, shaming yourself for wanting to prioritize your family or your health and well-being over your job, and B, not letting other people shame you for the same thing is really important. And the stronger your values, the easier that is, in my opinion.
100%. If you don't shame yourself, then nobody else is gonna be able to shame you about it because you don't feel like it's a bad thing. I have no problems with the fact that I don't go out after work. I'm not again, I'm not shading anybody who chooses to do that.
Mhm.
Maybe that's the only outlet they have, and that's if it's being used constructively in a positive light, God bless. Go for it, enjoy yourself. Um, but if somebody wants to give me a hard time about it, they can try, but I'm gonna be like, "All right, well, at the end of the day, I'm still going home to my family, so you can say whatever you want."
Exactly. And I think that's just so important, having that sort of conviction and confidence in what matters to you so that you can really stand up for yourself and stand up for those things that are important because again, at the end of the day, your family is going to be the one that's there for you when you retire
Yep,
or when shit hits the fan for whatever reason, or if you, God forbid, get sick or for all of the reasons your family and your loved ones are the ones that are going to show up. And you know the people who are giving you a hard time are not going to be the ones to show up. That's not to say no cop will show up, but the
right,
ones who are judging you or giving you a hard time or bullying you or acting like they're in high school, they're not going to show up for you when you need someone.
and I think and I'm not speaking for everybody, but from my personal experience, when somebody sees you me, if someone sees me strong in my convictions, maybe they're not, and that's kind of like a reality check for them, and that's something that they have to work through, but
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
hope they do, but that doesn't affect me.
Yeah, exactly. And also when you are being strong in your convictions and putting your priorities first and all of these things, I think you are giving permission to other people to do the same. So like
100%.
maybe there is that bully kid from the playground that's up there giving everybody a hard time, but there might be five other people who are going along with what he or she is saying and doing, but they don't really want to. They just feel like they don't have another option. And
And a
so
lot of
people
those
like you.
people who give pushback, they're the ones who I might get a phone call from in the middle of the night who don't wanna leave their name or number, but they're like, "I don't want any department resources at all, but I'm asking for a friend." And I'm like, "Awesome. Here you go. Whatever you need, here it is."
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely something there that needs to shift in the culture for sure.
Yes.
When it comes to this community piece, we're gonna wrap up soon here, but when it comes to this community piece, I just want to ask you a question that I ask most people who do have this strong non-law enforcement community. What about the ones who don't understand? I hear a lot like, oh, people who aren't in law enforcement don't understand that I can't make it to their barbecue or like whatever. And so I can't have friends who aren't in law enforcement. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a layered question. Yes, sometimes people do get really upset, and having to feel like you're disappointing somebody does add a layer of stress and guilt and whatever else to the fact that you can't show up to a family barbecue. And even if you had the plans to have to cancel at the last minute and now somebody's frustrated, or like a wedding, that happens a lot. And the bride and groom or whoever have already paid for this seat and now you can't go. That does happen. And I think it really depends on how much we make it a thing, and also realizing that, like, I am not responsible for somebody else's reaction, because I can say, "Listen, this is completely out of my control. I am so sorry to have to do this to you at the last minute, but I have to go into work." And I'm really, I feel horrible because I know, I said I was gonna be there and I do wanna be there, but this is out of my control, right? That's all you can do. If the other person gets upset, of course they're gonna be disappointed, but if they start to, like, resent you and get mad at you for it, unfortunately, that's out of your control.
Yeah. And I think too, this is like the opposite of what we were talking about with the kids thing, because it's like at the end of the day, if you have to cancel on a wedding, which actually I had never thought of, that would be really, really tough. If you have to
I had to
cancel
do
on
it.
a wedding,
Yeah,
that bride and groom will not remember that. That's not their priority. They might be mad when you tell them, like, oh God,
of
I just
course.
wasted $150 on your plate,
Right.
but it's their wedding day. They don't
Mm,
care. And I think that the same goes for um um birthday parties, retirement parties, um dinners, like any event. If and that's not to say like you're not special enough that they're not going to care, but if there's an event and you have to cancel, they might be mad or upset in the moment, but at the end of the day they're still going to have the event, and they're going to have fun, and they're going to look back on the event and be happy about it. They're not going to be like, "Oh, remember that time that we got married and like Dina couldn't come?"
right,
No offense,
exactly.
Dina, but like their wedding day is their wedding day.
Right. I'm not making or breaking somebody's wedding day. That's just the reality. Now, if it's to the point where, like, oh, every time Dina gets invited, she never shows up, she's a flake. Well, now it's like, now what's my priority? Am I choosing to
Mhm.
not show up, or am I actually getting ordered to work? And if I'm getting ordered to work, if this person is a priority in my life, then let me make time for them when I'm home. And I know that I'm not going to, get hit for anything as much as I can
Yes.
help it. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's such a good point, because there comes a time where you do have to look at yourself. Like if you are turning into the one person who can never come, it's like, all right, well, is this all because you're being mandated? Are you being mandated to work on every single time that I have an event? Or are you opting into overtime because you want to make a few extra dollars on the same day that I'm getting married? Or like, you know what I mean? And I think really taking a look at yourself and seeing sort of, again, where your priorities lie and where you're sort of being intentional with the decisions that you're making when it comes to these relationships as they pertain to the job. Because, and this is something that, again, I talk about a lot, it's like there are going to be times where you're forced to work as a cop. Like,
Of course.
unfortunately, that just is part of the job. But there are also times where you don't have to work. You don't have to pick up the extra overtime shift. If they call you and want you to come in, but it's not mandated, don't always take it. Like sometimes you do have to stand up for yourself and put your foot down and give a little
Yes.
bit of pushback. That's just
Yes.
kind of part of it. And it maybe it's really hard, but like sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
And honestly, I had a huge problem setting boundaries until I went to therapy and realized how important they were. And it can be very uncomfortable in the beginning when you're not used to it. But once you get used to it, you're like, all right, it just becomes normal.
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of guys, male cops who, you know, I just happen to talk to more men,
Of
but
course.
they'll say like sometimes the department will make you feel like it's mandatory when it's not. Like they are
Mhm.
actually just kind of pressuring you, like not peer pressure, but I don't know, job pressuring you to
Yes.
make you feel like you have no choice but to go in, and really kind of understanding what the difference is between the two things and understanding when you do kind of need to speak up for yourself is important.
Right, because sometimes and no if I don't blame whoever's calling the cop because it's making
Mhm.
their life easier.
Yeah.
If I get a phone call and it's like, "All right, well, we have this thing that needs to get filled. Do you wanna go?" Like, if I'm given the option, I'm probably gonna say no. If it's like, "All right, Dina, you're up. This is it. You're going." Okay, then I'm
Mhm.
going. But if it's not mandatory and if I can do it, I might, but if not, then I'm just gonna say no.
Yeah. And and again, this kind of goes back to that concept where it is a job. And like sometimes you need to say like so and so can do the same thing. So and so can take care of this. It's so and so's turn to work, so can they be the one to handle whatever the problem is at hand? Like one time we were on a family vacation and my dad got a call with like a break in whatever he was working on, and he was like, "Amazing, that's great. I can do X, Y, and Z, remotely from where we are on vacation." But like they wanted him to come in and he was like, "I can't come in. So let's figure this out and then
Mhm.
so and so can handle the rest of it, and then, I'll pick up in a day or two when I get back from vacation."
The reality is no matter how important any of us think that our job is, if we weren't here, we'd be replaced right away. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
you sign your retirement papers and you're replaced before the ink is even dry, or God forbid you get hurt, somebody else has to do that job. So, making and there's nothing wrong with taking pride in your work, that's not what I'm saying, but making work your whole life for a pat on the back,
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And I think long term, you got to think long term sometimes, and long term it will not make sense. You will not remember the pat on the back in 40 years, and
Right,
they won't remember giving you the pat on the back in 40 years. Like, it will not
exactly.
matter. Again, kind of going back to this whole concept of what stands out, what actually matters.
Not even in 40 years, like, the next
Yeah.
weekend when the next detail comes down, it's like, "Hey, can you do this?" And it's like, "But I just volunteered last week."
Yes.
"Yeah, yeah, but
Yes.
that was last week, this is this week, I need this right now." You know?
Yes.
That's how quickly it changes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love everything that you just said. Okay, in the interest of time, I
Yes,
do want to just ask you, just because we did talk about it briefly in the beginning. I know that you're what, 12, 15 years on?
14.
14. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you given any thought to a career after law enforcement?
Yes, I would love to do some sort of, like, support, even if it's, like, advocacy, I don't know, just something.
Mhm.
Whether it's, like, volunteering with people who support cops or, like, just in some capacity, just because I know how difficult this job can be, and I really want people to live long and collect, like,
Yes.
a pension for many, many years and enjoy time with their family and the things that are important, so if I can help people do that in some capacity, I'm all about it.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, but my priority is still gonna be my family.
Yes, yes, always. Amazing. Is there anything that we did not cover? Again, I feel like I could go on and talk to you about all of the things for such a long time, but is there anything that we didn't cover that you do want to make sure we touch on?
No, I think you covered everything, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Where can people find you if they want to follow you or get to know you or reach out to you?
I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is flawed yet faithful. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook as Dina Campbell.
Amazing. I'll put
Yeah.
all of your information that you want to share in the show notes. And thank you again. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.